Hi, welcome to the Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class, sponsored by the Hurricane Utah North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Mike Parker, and since 2008, it's been my privilege to be the instructor for this class. The Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class meets on Thursday evenings between September and May to discuss the scriptures, teachings, and history of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. If you live in or are visiting the Hurricane St. George area, I'd love to have you join us. Time and location are available on the class website. There's a link to that in the show notes just below this video. Also on the class website, you can download my notes, which includes footnotes documenting my sources, this PowerPoint presentation, and handouts that I distribute in class. Please note that this YouTube channel and the class website are not official sites of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Hurricane Utah North Stake, or any other church unit or department. I alone am responsible for the content on these sites. What you're about to see is a recording of my notes for one of the lessons. If you enjoy this video, please click the like button and share it with a friend. And please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted to this channel. My friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and the authority and keys that he held are now vested in the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And most importantly, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. I hope you enjoy this lesson. This lesson will focus mainly on the setting of Doctrine and Covenants, section 135, by covering the events that led to the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hyrum at Carthage, Illinois. We'll also look briefly at the aftermath of their deaths and Brigham Young's succession to the presidency of the church, which were preludes to section 136. This lesson brings us up to the spring of 1844. The key individuals in this lesson are first, Joseph Smith. Joseph was prophet, seer, and revelator to the saints. He was the mayor of Nauvoo, Illinois. With 12,000 inhabitants, Nauvoo had nearly the same population as Chicago, Illinois' largest city. One-third of Nauvoo's people, approximately 4,000 by the spring of 1844, were Latter-day Saint immigrants from Great Britain. He was Lieutenant General of the Nauvoo Legion, the largest standing military force in the western United States, numbering at least 2,500 men. He was also a candidate for President of the United States. Joseph decided to run for the presidency after querying a field of candidates in the fall of 1843 and finding none who would protect the saints from the harassment and violence they had experienced in Missouri and Illinois. Joseph's presidential run gave him the opportunity to raise public awareness about the plight of the saints. Second, Hyrum Smith, Joseph's older brother. He was patriarch to the church, assistant president of the church, vice mayor of Nauvoo, and major general in the Nauvoo Legion. Third, John Taylor. Taylor was a British immigrant to Canada who joined the church in 1836. He was called as an apostle and member of the Quorum of the 12 in 1838. He was also editor of the Times and Seasons, the church's newspaper, published twice monthly in Nauvoo. Fourth, Willard Richards. Richards was an apostle and member of the 12. He was a doctor, Joseph Smith's personal secretary, and church historian and recorder. Fifth, William Law. Law was an Irish immigrant who joined the church in 1837. He was called as second counselor in the First Presidency in 1841. Finally, Thomas Ford was governor of Illinois from 1842 to 1846. By 1844, the city of Nauvoo was just 5 years old. Nauvoo was the headquarters of the church and the location of the Nauvoo Temple, which by this time was nearing completion. Although Latter-day Saints lived in other parts of Hancock County, most of them resided in and around Nauvoo. Carthage, the county seat, was located roughly in the center of Hancock County, 16 miles or 26 kilometers southwest of Nauvoo. Carthage was also the hub of anti-Mormon hostility in the area and the home of the Carthage Greys, the city militia. 17 road miles, or 28 kilometers, south of Nauvoo on the Mississippi River was the town of Warsaw. It was the home of the Warsaw Signal, an anti-Mormon newspaper published by Thomas Sharp. It was also the headquarters of the Warsaw Militia, a state-chartered militia. Throughout his prophetic career, and especially in the final years and months leading up to the martyrdom, Joseph Smith had premonitions and forebodings that his life would be taken at the hands of others. Even before the translation of the Book of Mormon was finished, the Lord told him, quote, "Be firm in keeping the commandments wherewith I have commanded you. And if you do this, behold, I grant unto you eternal life, even if you should be slain." Unquote. 1 month later, the Lord revealed, quote, "And even if they do unto you, even as they have done unto me, blessed are ye, for you shall dwell with me in glory." Unquote. In a sermon delivered in April 1842, Joseph said, quote, "Some have supposed that Brother Joseph could not die, but this is a mistake. It is true, there has been times when I have had the promise of my life to accomplish such and such things, but having accomplished those things, I have not at present any lease on my life, and am as liable to die as other men." Unquote. In January 1843, he remarked, quote, "God Almighty is my shield, and what can man do if God is my friend? I shall not be sacrificed until my time comes. Then I shall be offered freely." Unquote. In January 1843, he was told by revelation that his calling and election had been made sure. D&C 132, verse 49, quote, "I seal upon you your exaltation, and prepare a throne for you in the kingdom of my father, with Abraham your father." Unquote. Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner recalled that Joseph told her in the spring of 1844, quote, "I have asked the Lord to take me away. I have to seal my testimony to this generation with my blood. I have to do it, for this work will never progress until I am gone, for the testimony is of no force until the testator is dead." Unquote. Brigham Young recalled in 1852, quote, "Though he had prophesied that he would not live to be 40 years of age, yet we all cherished hopes that that would be a false prophecy, and we should keep him forever with us. We thought our faith would outreach it, but we were mistaken. He at last fell a martyr to his religion. I said, it is all right. Now the testimony is in full force. He has sealed it with his blood, and that makes it valid." Unquote. Before his death, Joseph spent several months preparing the 12 apostles to lead the church. Wilford Woodruff recalled in 1869, quote, "Joseph Smith was what he professed to be, a prophet of God, a seer and revelator. He laid the foundation of this church and kingdom, and lived long enough to deliver the keys of the kingdom to the elders of Israel, under the 12 apostles. He spent the last winter of his life, some 3 or 4 months, with the quorum of the 12, teaching them. It was not merely a few hours ministering to them the ordinances of the gospel, but he spent day after day, week after week, and month after month, teaching them and a few others the things of the kingdom of God. Said he during that period, 'I now rejoice. I have lived until I have seen this burden, which has rested upon my shoulders, rolled on to the shoulders of other men. Now the keys of the kingdom are planted on the earth, to be taken away no more forever.' But until he had done this, they remained with him. And had he been taken away, they would have had to be restored by messengers out of heaven. But he lived until every key, power, and principle of the holy priesthood was sealed on the 12, and on President Brigham Young as their president. He told us that he was going away to leave us, going away to rest. Said he, "You have to round up your shoulders to bear up the kingdom. No matter what becomes of me, I have desired to see the Nauvoo temple built, but I shall not live to see it. You will. You are called upon to bear off this kingdom." This language was plain enough, but we did not understand it any more than the disciples of Jesus when he told them he was going away, and that if he went not, the Comforter would not come. It was just so with Joseph. He said this time after time to the 12 and to the female relief societies and in his public discourses, but none of us seemed to understand that he was going to seal his testimony with his blood. But so it was. Unquote. April 1844, just after General Conference, Joseph sent 10 of the 12 apostles east on political missions to campaign for his presidential bid. After establishing the city of Nauvoo in 1839, the Saints became the dominant political, economic, and social force in Hancock County, Illinois. This soon became a source of conflicts with non-Mormons in the area, just as it had before in Missouri. First, there were political conflicts. Most residents of Hancock County voted for Whig Party candidates, while most Mormons voted for the Democratic Party. The Nauvoo City Charter gave the City Council extraordinary powers, making Nauvoo something of an independent city-state. Critics were particularly opposed to the Nauvoo Municipal Court's power to grant writs of habeas corpus, which had allowed Joseph Smith and others to escape arrest and extradition by officers from hostile state and county governments. Non-Mormons viewed the Nauvoo Legion as an offensive force, not a defensive one. Then there were economic conflicts. The Saints tended to buy from and sell to other Saints. This created economic difficulties for farmers in the surrounding area who were trying to get their goods to market. Finally, there were social conflicts. Latter-day Saint lifestyles clashed with those practiced by many non-Mormons. For example, while alcohol was sold in Nauvoo, laws against public drunkenness were strictly enforced. These social differences were among the reasons Joseph Smith became a Freemason in the spring of 1842. He hoped to build trust based on a common bond with other Illinois Masons. In early 1844, a wave of apostasy swept through the church in Nauvoo. The leading apostates were William Law, second counselor in the First Presidency, and his brother Wilson Law, a major general in the Nauvoo Legion, the brothers Robert and Charles Foster, the brothers Francis and Chauncey Higbee, non-Mormon Sylvester Emmons, and Joseph H. Jackson. These men had about 200 followers. They opposed the then secret practice of plural marriage and Joseph Smith's other new doctrines, including his teaching in Nauvoo about a plurality of gods. They also believed Joseph had too much power as both prophet of the church and mayor of Nauvoo, and they opposed his campaign for president of the United States. They began holding secret meetings in March 1844. Those who attended swore that there would not be one of the Smith family left alive in Nauvoo, and swore to wash their hands in Joseph and Hiram's blood. Their secret meetings were exposed, and the conspirators were excommunicated in April 1844. After that, they made public accusations and threats against Joseph and other church leaders, and accused Joseph of being a fallen prophet. They formed their own church with William Law as prophet. On the 26th of April, 1844, the Fosters and Chauncey Higbee unsuccessfully attempted to assassinate Joseph Smith in his office with a pistol. The group published their grievances in the Nauvoo Expositor, an opposition newspaper. The first and only issue of the Expositor was published on Friday, the 7th of June, 1844. In it, the editors attacked Joseph Smith and made public his teaching and practice of plural marriage, hence the name Expositor, one who lays open for examination. The newspaper was not restrained in its condemnation of Joseph and the Latter-day Saints. It called Joseph Smith one of the blackest and basest scoundrels that has appeared on the stage of human existence since the days of Nero and Caligula. It described the church's leaders as heaven-daring, hell-deserving, God-forsaken villains who were demons in human shape. It referred to the Latter-day Saints as a credulous and superstitious people. It attacked the pretended authority of the city charter and the unjust, illegal, and unconstitutional ordinances carried out by city authorities. It called for the unconditional repeal of the Nauvoo city charter. It claimed, quote, "All is not well, while whoredoms and all manner of abominations are practiced under the cloak of religion. Lo, the wolf is in the fold, arrayed in sheep's clothing, and is spreading death and devastation among the saints," unquote. Its stated goal was to explode the vicious principles of Joseph Smith and those who practice plural marriage, which the paper called abominations and whoredoms. The Nauvoo City Council met to discuss the expositor on Saturday, the 8th of June, and Monday, the 10th of June, 1844. After lengthy sessions on both days, the council decided, according to their understanding of the Nauvoo City Charter and the law, that the expositor was libelous and a public nuisance, and they ordered the mayor to remove it. Mayor Joseph Smith instructed the city marshal to destroy the expositor's press, scatter its type, and burn any remaining newspapers. City Marshal John P. Green, accompanied by a posse of several hundred men, carried out the destruction at 10:00 p.m. on the evening of Monday, the 10th of June. Some scholars have argued that the City Council's actions were legal, based on the council members' understanding of the law at that time. Legal or not, it was the most inflammatory action the council could have taken, and it led directly to the death of the prophet Joseph Smith. Critics of the church declared the destruction of the expositor to be a violation of freedom of the press. The publishers rushed to Carthage, the Hancock County seat, and obtained a warrant against the Nauvoo City Council on the charge of riot. On Thursday and Friday, 13th and 14th of June, Joseph Smith and other city council members were arrested. They were released following a habeas corpus hearing before the Nauvoo Municipal Court. Outraged citizens groups in Hancock County called for the removal of the saints from Illinois. Thomas Sharp sedately editorialized in the Warsaw Signal, quote, "War and extermination is inevitable. Citizens, arise, one and all. Can you stand by and suffer such infernal devils to rob men of their property and rights without avenging them? We have no time for comment. Every man will make his own. Let it be made with powder and ball." Unquote. Over the next week, tensions in Hancock County continued to escalate. Joseph Smith wrote to Illinois Governor Thomas Ford, apprising him of the circumstances. He included sworn statements concerning the threats that had been made against the saints. Some residents of Hancock County demanded that Governor Ford mobilize the state militia and bring Joseph Smith and the Nauvoo City Council members to justice. Otherwise, they pledged to form a mob and do it themselves. Hiram Smith wrote to Brigham Young and directed that he, the other apostles, and all other elders on political missions should return immediately to Nauvoo. Joseph mobilized the Nauvoo Legion, and on Tuesday, the 18th of June, he placed the city under martial law. Governor Ford then stepped in to try to resolve the situation. Hoping to calm the rising tensions and avoid civil war, Governor Ford came to Carthage himself, arriving on the morning of Friday, the 21st of June. The next day, he wrote to Joseph Smith and insisted that the only way to satisfy the people of Hancock County was for Joseph and the city council to be tried before a non-Mormon jury in Carthage. He promised to protect the defendants if they gave themselves up. Joseph did not believe that the governor could fulfill his pledge. He believed that if they gave themselves up, the justice system would, quote, drag us from place to place, from court to court, across the creeks and prairies, till some bloodthirsty villain can find his opportunity to shoot us, unquote. Joseph prophesied to Stephen Markham that if he and Hiram were ever taken again, they would be massacred. "I want Hiram to live to avenge my blood," he said, "but he is determined not to leave me." After careful deliberation, Joseph made his decision. Quote, It is clear to my mind what to do. All they want is Hiram and myself. There is no doubt they will come here and search for us. Let them search. They will not harm the saints in person or property, and not even a hair of your head. We will cross the river tonight and go away to the west." Unquote. On Saturday, the 22nd of June, after 9:00 p.m., Joseph and Hiram said tearful goodbyes to their families and crossed the Mississippi River in a small boat. Early the next morning, Sunday the 23rd of June, a posse from Carthage arrived in Nauvoo to arrest Joseph and Hiram. When they did not find the brothers, they threatened to occupy the city if Joseph and Hiram did not give themselves up, even if it took 3 years to do it. That same morning, at the request of Emma Smith, several men went across the river to see Joseph. They told him that mobs would burn Nauvoo and massacre the saints if Joseph didn't return, and they accused the prophet of cowardice. Joseph replied, "If my life is of no value to my friends, it is of none to myself." Turning to his brother, he asked, "Brother Hiram, you are the oldest. What shall we do?" Hiram replied, "Let us go back and give ourselves up and see the thing out." After considering this for a few moments, Joseph said, "If you go back, I shall go with you, but we shall be butchered." Hiram said, "No, no, let us go back and put our trust in God, and we shall not be harmed. The Lord is in it. If we live or have to die, we will be reconciled to our fate." That afternoon, Joseph and Hiram wrote a letter to Governor Ford, agreeing to come to Carthage and submit to a fair trial. That night, they returned to Nauvoo. On Monday, the 24th of June, at 6:30 a.m., Joseph, Hiram, Apostle John Taylor, Joseph's secretary Willard Richards, 15 other members of the Nauvoo City Council, and several of their friends set out on horseback for Carthage. After pausing at the temple site and surveying the city, Joseph remarked, "This is the loveliest place and the best people under the heavens. Little do they know the trials that await them." 4 miles, or 6.4 kilometers from Nauvoo, the party met up with Captain James Dunn and 60 members of the Illinois State Militia. Joseph signed their order surrendering the Nauvoo Legion's state arms. At this point, Joseph said, quote, "I am going like a lamb to the slaughter, but I am as calm as a summer's morning. I have a conscience void of offense toward God and toward all men. If they take my life, I shall die an innocent man, and my blood shall cry from the ground for vengeance. And it shall yet be said of me, he was murdered in cold blood." Unquote. The initial events when the party arrived at Carthage are quite detailed. The following is only a brief synopsis. Carthage was in a state of near riot. Mobs of irate townsmen and farmers from throughout western Illinois who had been clamoring for Joseph Smith's arrest were now eager to see the captives. There were more than 1,400 unruly militia members, including the local Carthage Greys. Many of them had been drinking alcohol. On Tuesday, the 25th of June, the party surrendered to Constable David Bettisworth on the original charge of riot. Almost immediately, Joseph and Hiram were charged with treason against the state of Illinois for declaring martial law in Nauvoo. Joseph and Hiram were paraded before the mob, who yelled insults and death threats at the brothers. That afternoon, a preliminary hearing was held before Robert F. Smith, a justice of the peace, who was also captain of the Carthage Greys and an anti-Mormon. The Nauvoo City Council members were released on $500 bonds each, pending later trial. Judge Smith ordered Joseph and Hiram to be held in jail until they could be tried for treason, a capital offense. Joseph and Hiram were hustled to Carthage jail through a great rabble in the streets. 8 of their friends went with them, including Dan Jones and Stephen Markham, who beat the crowds back with their walking sticks. Governor Ford and his party prepared to travel to Nauvoo the next day and leave the prisoners at the jail in the protection of the Carthage Greys. The Carthage jail was built in 1839. This etching shows how it looked in 1853. The church purchased the jail in 1903 and has since restored it to its original appearance. The jail was constructed of native red limestone. It measures 29 by 35 feet, or 8.8 by 10.7 meters. Like other county jails in Illinois, it was built to incarcerate petty thieves and debtors and serve as a temporary holding place for violent criminals. From the front door entrance, past the stairs and down the hall, is the debtor's room. Nonviolent offenders were incarcerated here. Prisoners charged with more serious crimes were kept in the dungeon or criminal cell at the top of the stairs. This cell is small and dark, and it had only meager makeshift furnishings. The remainder of the first floor consists of a living room and a small kitchen. These rooms were used by the jailer and his family. A summer kitchen was added to the side of the building in 1850. Joseph and his company were first placed in close confinement in the dungeon at the top of the stairs, number 1 on this cutaway diagram. Later, they were moved downstairs to the debtor's room in the northwest corner of the first floor, number 2 on the opposite side of this view. Finally, they were transferred to the jailer's upstairs bedroom. This room is at the top of the stairs on the right. Joseph remained a prophet to the end, bearing testimony and prophesying to others in the jail. He gave his final testimony on the evening of Wednesday, the 26th of June. According to witnesses who were present, quote, Joseph bore a powerful testimony to the guards of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon, the restoration of the gospel, the administration of angels, and that the kingdom of God was again established upon the earth, for the sake of which he was then incarcerated in that prison, and not because he had violated any law of God or man, unquote. He gave his last prophecy during the night of the 26th and the 27th of June. John Taylor, Willard Richards, John S. Fulmer, Stephen Markham, and Dan Jones stayed the night with Joseph and Hyrum. Quote, when all were apparently fast asleep, Joseph whispered to Dan Jones, "Are you afraid to die?" Dan said, "Has that time come, think you? Engaged in such a cause, I do not think that death would have many terrors." Joseph replied, "You will yet see whales and fulfill the mission appointed you before you die." Unquote. Dan Jones survived 3 attempts on his life the next day and eventually served 2 missions to his homeland, where he personally baptized about 2,000 people and directed the missionary effort that led to over 15,000 Welsh converts joining the church. We now come to that fateful day, Thursday, the 27th of June, 1844. In the morning, Frank Worrell, the officer of the jail guard, told Dan Jones, quote, "We have had too much trouble to bring old Joe here to let him ever escape alive. And unless you want to die with him, you had better leave before sundown. And you'll see that I can prophesy better than old Joe, for neither he nor his brother, nor anyone who will remain with them, will see the sun set today." Unquote. Joseph directed Dan Jones to go to Governor Ford and tell him what Worrell had said. On his way, Jones overheard an assembly of militiamen promise to kill Joseph Smith that afternoon after the governor had left for Nauvoo. Jones took these reports to Governor Ford, but the governor dismissed them, telling him, quote, "You are unnecessarily alarmed for the safety of your friends, sir. The people are not that cruel." Unquote. Jones returned to the Carthage jail, but he was refused entry. Back in the street, he met Chauncey Higby, one of the Nauvoo apostates, who told him, quote, "We are determined to kill Joe and Hyrum, and you had better go away and save yourself." Unquote. Cyrus Wheelock visited the jail with written orders from the governor to allow him to enter. Fearing a mob attack and worrying about the lack of security at the jail, he snuck in with him and passed to Joseph a 6-shot pepperbox pistol. Joseph offered Hyrum a single-shot pistol that John S. Fulmer had given him earlier, telling his brother, "You may have use for this." Hiram hesitated, observing, "I hate to use such things, or to see them used." Joseph replied, "So do I, but we may have to defend ourselves." Hiram took the pistol. Governor Ford's party left for Nauvoo, and the Carthage jail guard forced most of Joseph's remaining friends to leave. Those who left took messages to Joseph and Hiram's friends and family with them. Only John Taylor and Willard Richards were permitted to stay. That afternoon, just after 3:00 p.m., John Taylor sang "The Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief" and repeated it at Joseph's request. With the governor having left for Nauvoo and their ranks bolstered by members of the Warsaw militia, Carthage Gray's militiamen grabbed their rifles, blacked their faces with wet gunpowder, and rushed to the jail just before 5:15 p.m. They numbered over 100 men. The 8 Carthage Grays protecting the jail had arranged to have their rifles packed with powder, but no ball, the equivalent of firing blanks. As the mob approached, the guards fired their guns into the air in mock defense of the jail. The mob approached the front entrance of the jail on the south side. Upon entering the jail, they charged up the stairs and fired their muskets into the dungeon, believing, incorrectly, that Joseph and his associates were being held there. The members of the mob were armed with state-issued smoothbore flintlock muskets. These fired a .65 caliber lead ball about the diameter of a marble or U.S. dime. Muskets are single-shot firearms. After each shot, they must be reloaded from the muzzle with cartridge paper, powder, and ball before being fired again. This process usually took 20 to 30 seconds, depending on the experience of the shooter. Because the landing at the top of the jail stairs would admit only 3 or 4 people, the Carthage Grays would either have to pause to reload or pass their muskets down the stairs in exchange for fresh ones. Either way, this gave Joseph and his companions in the bedroom a few moments to react after the first shots were fired into the dungeon next door to the bedroom where they were. John Taylor testified, quote, "As I went to the door, I found Brother Hiram and Dr. Willard Richards already leaning against it. They both pressed against the door with their shoulders to prevent it being opened, as the lock and latch were comparatively useless." Unquote. Realizing that the prisoners were not in the dungeon, the members of the mob turned the corner to the jailer's bedroom door. John Taylor reported that they, quote, "strove to open the door, probably thought it was locked, and fired a ball through the keyhole." Almost instantly, another ball passed through the panel of the door and struck Brother Hiram on the left side of the nose, entering his face and head. Simultaneously, at the same instant, another ball entered his back, passing through his body and striking his watch. Immediately, when the ball struck him, he fell flat on his back, crying as he fell, "I am a dead man." He never moved afterwards. Brother Joseph drew nigh to Hiram, and, leaning over him, exclaimed, "Oh, my poor dear Brother Hiram." He, however, instantly arose, and with a firm, quick step and a determined expression of countenance, approached the door, and pulling the 6-shooter left by Brother Wheelock from his pocket, opened the door slightly and snapped the pistol 6 successive times. Only 3 of the barrels, however, were discharged. Unquote. Willard Richards then reported, quote, "Mr. Taylor with his walking stick stood by Joseph's side and knocked down the bayonets and muskets, which were constantly discharging through the doorway, while I stood by him, ready to lend any assistance with another stick, but could not come within striking distance without going directly before the muzzle of the guns." Unquote. The evidence suggests that the attackers were firing volleys of 2 to 3 muskets every 20 to 30 seconds. John Taylor continued, quote, "While I was engaged in parrying the guns, Brother Joseph said, 'That's right, Brother Taylor, parry them off as well as you can.' These were the last words I ever heard him speak on earth." Unquote. Willard Richards wrote, quote, "When the revolver failed, we had no more firearms, and expecting an immediate rush of the mob, and the doorway full of muskets, halfway into the room, and no hope but instant death from within." Unquote. Returning to John Taylor's experience, quote, "As I expected the attackers every moment to rush into the room, nothing but extreme cowardice having thus far kept them out. As the tumult and pressure increased, without any other hope, I made a spring for the window, which was opposite the jail door where the mob was standing. As I reached the window and was on the point of leaping out, I was struck by a ball from the door about midway of my thigh, which struck the bone and flattened out almost to the size of $0.25, and then passed on through the fleshy part to within about half an inch of the outside. I think some prominent nerve must have been severed or injured, for as soon as the ball struck me, I fell like a bird when shot, or an ox struck by a butcher, and lost entirely and instantaneously all power of action or locomotion. I fell onto the windowsill and cried out, 'I am shot!' Not possessing any power to move, I felt myself falling outside the window, but immediately I fell inside, from some, at that time, unknown cause. When I struck the floor, my animation seemed restored. As soon as I felt the power of motion, I crawled under the bed, which was in the corner of the room, not far from the window where I had received my wound. While on my way and under the bed, I was wounded in 3 other places. One ball entered a little below the left knee and was never extracted. Another entered the forepart of my left arm, a little above the wrist, and passing down by the joint, lodged in the fleshy part of my hand, about midway, a little above the upper joint of my little finger. Another struck me on the fleshy part of my left hip, and tore away the flesh as large as my hand, dashing the mangled fragments of flesh and blood against the wall." Unquote. John Taylor's pocket watch was shattered in these moments. He believed that it was struck by a musket ball from outside the window, and that this was what caused him to fall back inside the room instead of out through the window. Recent examination of the watch has concluded, however, that it may have been broken when he was hit in the leg and fell against the windowsill. The exact cause remains unknown. The manuscript history of the church continues the account. Quote, "Joseph, seeing there was no safety in the room, and probably thinking that it would save the lives of his brethren in the room if he could escape, turned calmly from the door, dropped his pistol on the floor, and sprang into the open east window." Unquote. William Daniels, who was an eyewitness on the ground below, testified, quote, "But just as he was preparing to descend, he saw such an array of bayonets below that he caught by the window casing where he hung by his hands and feet. While he was hanging in that situation, Colonel Levi Williams, leader of the Warsaw militia, shouted to the mob, 'Shoot him! God damn him! Shoot the damned rascal!'" Unquote. Willard Richards reported, quote, "2 balls pierced Joseph from the door, and one entered his right breast from without, and he fell outward, exclaiming, 'O Lord, my God!'" Unquote. The prophet's final cry may have been a call for assistance from the Masons and the mob. If a Freemason says aloud, "O Lord, my God, is there no help for the widow's son?" his fellow Masons are obligated by oath to come to his aid. There were undoubtedly Masons in the mob, and if Joseph was calling for help, they violated their oaths by denying him assistance. Richards continued, quote, "At this instant a cry was raised, 'He's left the window!' and the mob on the stairs and in the entry ran out." Unquote. At this moment, someone in the mob shouted, "The Mormons are coming!" Probably fearing that it was the Nauvoo Legion, the mob quickly dispersed, leaving Joseph's lifeless body next to the well. Willard Richards indicated that the entire attack lasted 2 to 3 minutes. Recent scholarship estimates that between 45 and 55 shots were fired by the mob into the Carthage jail bedroom. Joseph and Hyrum were both shot 5 times. The fatal shot for Hyrum was the first one that struck him alongside his nose and possibly exited through his chin. Joseph received 2 fatal shots to the chest while he was in the windowsill. John Taylor was hit by 4 balls. One struck him in the left wrist and was extracted shortly after the attack by a physician who used a dull penknife and a carpenter's compass. Another ball lodged below his left knee, and doctors were unable to remove it. He carried it for the rest of his life. Willard Richards, who at over 300 pounds was the largest target in the room, was the only one not injured, except for a graze on the lower tip of his left ear. His escape fulfilled a prophecy that Joseph had made over a year earlier that, quote, the time would come that the balls would fly around him like hail, and he should see his friends fall on the right and on the left, but there should not be a hole in his garment. Unquote. As the mob dispersed, Willard Richards dragged the gravely injured John Taylor into the dungeon and hid him under a mattress. Richards then cautiously went outside to confirm that the prophet Joseph was in fact dead. Other residents of Carthage soon came to the aid of the two men. Later that evening, Willard Richards was able to get a brief letter off to Nauvoo. Joseph and Hiram are dead. Not wanting to alarm John Taylor's family, he added, Taylor wounded, not very badly. Joseph and Hiram's bodies were returned to Nauvoo the following day, Friday, the 28th of June. Their bodies were cleaned and examined. Death masks were made, preserving their facial features. A public viewing was held on Saturday, the 29th of June, after which empty coffins, weighted with sandbags, were used at the public burial. The actual coffins bearing the bodies of the Smith brothers were initially buried under the unfinished Nauvoo house. These were later disinterred and reburied deep under an outbuilding on the Smith homestead. This elaborate scheme was devised to prevent the theft or mutilation of Joseph and Hiram's bodies. The location of their burial site was eventually lost to memory. In 1928, Frederick M. Smith, president of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and grandson of Joseph Smith Jr., feared that rising water from the Mississippi River would destroy the gravesite. He authorized civil engineer William O. Hands to conduct an excavation to find Joseph and Hiram's bodies. Hands did an extensive digging on the homestead and located the bodies. Joseph and Hiram's remains were examined and photographed, and their bodies were reinterred in the Smith family cemetery in Nauvoo alongside Emma Smith. After the initial burial, attention turned to who was responsible for murdering Joseph and Hiram. Many people accused Illinois Governor Thomas Ford of knowing about the plot to kill Joseph, and some even said that he approved of it. Ford denied these charges. The early saints never forgave Thomas Ford for breaking his promise to protect Joseph and Hiram during their incarceration at Carthage. The second verse of Praise to the Man, William W. Phelps' tribute to Joseph Smith, written in August 1844, originally read, Long shall his blood, which was shed by assassins, stain Illinois, while the earth lauds his fame. 5 men were tried for the murder of the Smith brothers. The defendants were Thomas C. Sharp, owner and editor of the Warsaw Signal, Colonel Levi Williams, chief commanding officer of the Warsaw Militia, Mark Aldrich, a major in the Warsaw Militia, William Grover, a captain in the Warsaw Militia, and Jacob Davis, a captain in the Warsaw Militia and an Illinois state senator. The trial of these 5 men took place in May 1845 at Carthage. All of them were found not guilty. The trial jury was composed exclusively of non-Mormons, after the defense counsel convinced the judge to toss out the initial jury, which included Latter-day Saints. No one was ever brought to justice for the murders of Joseph and Hiram. In his History of Illinois, Thomas Ford wrote his assessment of Joseph Smith's legacy. Quote, Thus fell Joe Smith, the most successful impostor in modern times, a man who, though ignorant and coarse, had some great natural parts which fitted him for temporary success, but which were so obscured and counteracted by the inherent corruption and vices of his nature that he never could succeed in establishing a system of policy which looked to permanent success in the future. Unquote. Contrast that with the epitaph for Joseph in the Doctrine and Covenants. Quote, Joseph Smith, the prophet and seer of the Lord, has done more, save Jesus only, for the salvation of men in this world than any other man that ever lived in it, and left a fame and name that cannot be slain. He lived great, and he died great in the eyes of God and his people, and like most of the Lord's anointed in ancient time, has sealed his mission and his works with his own blood. Unquote. Brothers and sisters, my friends, I have a witness from the Holy Spirit that Joseph Smith was the Lord's prophet, called and ordained to restore the keys and authority of God's holy priesthood and to unlock the door of salvation for this last dispensation. He received these keys from holy angels and resurrected beings. Through him, the Lord restored the fullness of the gospel to the earth. He and his brother Hiram were martyrs for the cause of Christ, and they live today as exalted prophets in the celestial kingdom of our God. It is because of those keys that I have a sure promise of salvation and exaltation with my wife and children, which is the greatest blessing I could ever desire. God be praised for the prophet Joseph Smith. After the prophet Joseph's death, there was a leadership crisis within the church. Joseph died without leaving a clear line of succession, and there were differing views among the saints as to who should assume the leadership of the church. The two primary contenders to succeed Joseph Smith were Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young. At the time of Joseph's death, Sidney Rigdon was first counselor in the first presidency and Joseph's vice presidential running mate. Sidney had moved to Pennsylvania in the spring of 1844, but he returned to Nauvoo on the 3rd of August, 1844, where he announced at a public meeting that he had received a revelation appointing him guardian of the church. Brigham Young was president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He and the other members of the 12 who had been on political missions in the East returned to Nauvoo on the 6th of August, 1844, 3 days after Rigdon. Brigham declared, quote, Joseph conferred upon our heads all the keys and powers belonging to the apostleship, which he himself held before he was taken away, and no man or set of men can get between Joseph and the 12 in this world or in the world to come. Unquote. William Marks, president of the Nauvoo stake, called a conference for Thursday, the 8th of August, to decide the matter. Sidney Rigdon spoke first to the assembled saints and asked them to confirm his role as guardian. To back his claim, he cited his long relationship with Joseph Smith and the fact that he was the only surviving member of the first presidency. He also argued that Joseph had sent him to Pennsylvania to prevent the entire first presidency from being killed in the ongoing conflict with non-Mormons in Hancock County. Rigdon spoke for 90 minutes, after which there was a 2.5-hour recess. When the conference resumed, Brigham Young spoke. He emphasized that no man could ever replace Joseph Smith, but he affirmed that the Quorum of the 12 Apostles held all the keys of the priesthood that Joseph had held. He answered Sidney Rigdon's proposal to be named guardian by claiming that Rigdon and Joseph had become estranged in recent years. Rather than a single guardian, Young proposed that the Quorum of the 12 be named the church's leaders. Many of the saints later recalled that while Brigham spoke, he looked or sounded like Joseph Smith. Mosiah Hancock testified that he, quote, saw Brother Brigham Young, or of the Quorum of the 12, arise before the people, and I saw him in the look of Joseph and the voice of Joseph, and it seemed to me that he was as tall as Joseph too. I knew that the mantle of Joseph had fallen on Brigham. Unquote. The saints at the conference voted overwhelmingly to sustain the Quorum of the 12 as the new leaders of the church. After both federal and state governments had failed to protect their rights in Missouri and Illinois, the saints felt that they had had enough, and the only way they could find a place where they could live and worship in peace was to leave the United States. After they were sustained as the church's leaders, The 12 apostles immediately began making plans to take the saints to the west. Brigham Young reviewed information about the Great Salt Lake Valley, which was at that time within the Mexican Republic. He consulted with mountain men, trappers, and others who had been to the west. He decided on a plan to cross Iowa Territory, join up with the established Oregon Trail through present-day Nebraska and Wyoming, and then turn southwest at Fort Bridger for the final leg of the journey into Salt Lake Valley. The Saints began their trek in early February 1846. Brigham had hoped to reach the Great Salt Lake that summer, but heavy rains delayed them. The Saints established camps at Canesville, Iowa Territory, now called Council Bluffs, and across the Missouri River at Winter Quarters, Nebraska, near present-day Omaha, where they spent the winter of 1846 and 1847. On the 14th of January, 1847, during the stay at Winter Quarters, Brigham Young received a revelation concerning the organization of the camp for the journey west. In 1876, this revelation was canonized as Section 136 of the Doctrine and Covenants. A vanguard company of 148 people and 73 wagons departed Winter Quarters in early April 1847. Scouts entered the Salt Lake Valley on the 21st of July, 1847. Brigham and the rest of the party arrived 3 days later, on Saturday, the 24th of July. By December 1847, more than 2,000 saints had made the journey to Salt Lake. On the 27th of December, 1847, after extensive discussion, the 12 apostles reorganized the First Presidency, with Brigham Young as the president of the church. Since that time, it has been the practice in the church for the senior member of the Quorum of the 12 to become the president of the church following the death of his predecessor. That concludes this lesson. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. Please subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new lessons are posted to this channel, and visit www.huarc.org to download these notes, this slideshow, and a handout with a diagram of the Carthage jail and Willard Richards' complete testimony of what happened that afternoon in June 1844. Next week will be the final lesson for this course. We'll discuss two recently canonized revelations that help us understand more about the redemption of the dead, sections 137 and 138. See you next time.